Hey guys, how's it going? So today we're going to be talking about cables made with science, and it's affordable and handcrafted in Canada. So I was over at Canuck Audio Mart where there's multiple listings of used gear as well as some new gear from manufacturers and dealers. And I'm not sponsored by them by any chance. I just go to their website and I'm an avid user myself to scavenge for new gear and stuff. And it's a really nice platform to sell and buy used gear. And so I was on there and I was looking at some listings and I came across this company called NRG. Now this NRG company is a cable company and they make power cables as well as speaker cables that we'll both talk about today in this video. But I really like the price point of these. They're very affordable for what they are and how they look and the performance that goes with it. So in this video, we're going to talk about the construction, a little bit about the company, the build quality, and as well as the sound quality, my subjective opinion of using them for the last few months. So let's talk about that right now. So first off, let's talk about the company a little bit first. NRG is a company that has been quite new. They have been around, but they're not like well known or, it's not like AudioQuest or Kimber Cables. So this is like a one-man business, and from my understanding, these cables are handcrafted by a person in Canada in Winnipeg. So this is really nice to see and amazing because he has done his research. This is not some just DIY person that is just trying to make some buck or two with cables, but this is someone that is really passionate about the cables, and you can really see that if you go to their website and start looking at what they're doing and what their research is doing. So he has done his research, and I like that because anytime you enter into a market with a product, you need to know your market, you need to know what you're talking about, you need to know what you're gonna be delivering that is unique to the customers outside of just being cables. So if you go to his website, he talks about a few things that I really like, and one of the things is that the purity of the coppers that go inside his cables. And he talks about how he uses 4N cables. And for those of you that don't know, 4N, 5N, 6N, this stands for purity of copper. And the 4N just really means the four numbers, so 99.9999%. And then if it's 7N, there's 7 nines. So basically all that is the purity of copper. And he talks about how this is like a marketing thing and it's not really, evident of how pure the copper is and why he doesn't need to go over the 4N figure in terms of purity of copper that he uses in his cables. And so if that confuses you, all you have to really know is that the conductors inside this cable is as high as purity of copper as possible, as far as I'm concerned, that he should be using in cables for the highest, fidelity possible. As well, he also talks about something very interesting that intrigued my mind, and that was the connectors. And yeah, that's one of the highlights of these cables, and the unique factor of these cables is the connectors. Now he talks about how the connectors are a bottleneck because yes, you can use 7N, 8N, zillion N, highest purity copper, or even silver in the conductor, but then it's going through the connectors, and the connectors are never 100% copper because 100% copper will not be possible because it won't hold a shape because it's a very flexible material. It's a very soft metal, right? Copper. So it will bend and malform, so it won't be able to hold a shape. So usually in the industry, what happens is that they use connectors that is a metal alloy. And that's the same for this connector as well, and we'll talk about that. But it needs to be a metal alloy, which means that it's a mixture of different materials, different metals, like copper is still there, but it's like 30% copper and 65% brass, etc., because it needs to hold a shape. Now, this person decided to make custom plugs that has a content of 97 to 98% copper, and the rest is something else so that it can still hold a shape. So the connectors are the highest purity copper content possible as well, so that the connectors are no longer a bottleneck. And furthermore, in terms of build quality, I really like the fact that these are aluminum chassis that's covering this, and it looks pretty. Has made in Canada, carefully crafted in Canada logo on it, and I really like that. Just elegant look, looks really high-end, and there's not many companies out there, even in the high-end audio category, that makes their own custom plugs. He also goes into talking about how he uses more conductors, more content inside the cables, which makes the cables pretty thick. He also uses dielectric material called Teflon, which is the industry standard for high-end cables. as a dielectric. The vacuum air is the best one, but obviously that's not possible unless you're out in the space. And so there's other options like air and all these kind of suspension designs and really high-end designs out there. But far as I'm concerned, Teflon is one of the best materials when it comes to dielectric that's used in cables today in the high-end market. And so that's what he's using in his cables as well. He uses also ample, like a lot of insulation material to make sure the cables are very well separated and very well insulated and away from EMI and RFI and so on, all that kind of stuff. The jacket he uses is also unique in the fact that they're vibrational control devices, and he will talk to you about that if you have more questions as to why he uses it. And that's the other thing that I really like about him and this company is that they're able to explain why and what he's doing to a very specific degree. Now, often when I go to high-end cable companies or even manufacturers in general and ask, why did you do that? The answer that comes back is quite disappointing. It's usually along the lines of, well, we experimented and it sounds better, but there's no really explanation as to how they got there or what the explanation is to why it makes it sound better. So I like the fact that he has done enough research and he does things that he believes in, that he has done his research and he can explain to a very specific degree. So I do like that fact. Now, with this being said, more content in the cables as well as insulation makes these cables extremely thick, both the speaker cable as well as the power cable. And the thing that I really don't like about heavy gauge cables like this is the fact that they are not very flexible, they're hard to work with, and sometimes when you plug the cables in, they will start to sag these sockets themselves, as well as the speaker cables. If they're heavy and they're not very flexible, what ends up happening is that they fall off very easily, they're sagging and lifting the the speakers if it's sometimes lighter. And these cables are 6 gauge, so they're very heavy. So they're very big cables. So that's some of the things that I found in the past very annoying with heavy gauge cables. But that is not the case with these cables, and that's what surprised me. First of all, they are very flexible, and because they are a spiral construction, they are able to be very flexible and keep its flexibility, even though they're very heavy gauge cables, as you can see here. And that's what I really like about them. They're flexible. They are absolutely really well made and really thought out designs in terms of how the end user is going to use it. Often with high-end cables, I am frustrated in the high-end market because while they look impressive and they may perform excellent, they don't really talk about the functionality and how easy it is for the end user to use, flexibility with heavy gauge cables, and the fact that these connectors don't sag your sockets. It's not going to cause a fire. It's not going to cause issues. It's a big factor. And also these cables, I was initially afraid that the speaker cables will be sagging a little bit, but it does not sag. It just falls off really nicely without causing any issues. And that's probably because of how the cables are constructed, the weight distribution, and so on is done really well. Everything is thought out really well. And you can tell that they actually used the cables themselves before actually, bringing it to the market so that it actually works in real life situations. And you can really tell that this company stands behind his creation, his product, and he's really passionate because he's offering 60-day money-back guarantee, 60-day, and a lifetime warranty on his cables. Yeah, that's a commitment right there. So all these cables I tested and they work fabulously in my room and in my system. So with that being said, let's start talking about the sound. So you guys know that I do this subjectively, and one of the things that I have done in the past that I no longer do, at least with power cables, is get one cable in and then plug it into my source, my power amp, my preamp, and try it once at a time and try to figure out what the power cable is doing, because that's kind of impossible for me since there's so much other stuff that's going around in the system. So I can't really discern what this cable is doing if I'm just using one cable. So instead, I have used multiple cables, and as you can see here, there's many different jacket finishes for the power cable as well as the speaker cable that you can opt into. And he sells a variety of different colors and patterns that you can choose from, and so you can match the style of your room and listening room very well. But that's point aside. What I did in my system was use these cables across my source, my amplifier, my preamplifier, whatever I'm reviewing at the time. The entire chain had these power cables. And I do this for every power cable I'm testing so that I know the differences that this power cable is making separate from other stuff that's happening in my system. And when you do that, the collective difference that is made is more evident, in my opinion, and I can hear and discern the differences that these power cables are making more easily. Now, another thing that I did was I bought some Amazon cables, just stock cables that I have lying around, and I switched all of my cables to stock cables and then went back and forth with stock versus the NRG power cables. And this is something I'm going to be doing going forward with all the power cables I am testing, and I have done this with this cable as well. Now, another thing is that I tried to do blind testing, which was quite impossible because we had to take out all the stock cables, all the Amazon cables, and then replace it with this and going back and forth. But I tried anyways, but it's not accurate by any means because of the time that it took in between. But I did prefer the NRG cables 7 out of 10 times, which is not really statistically significant in any way, but I did prefer the NRG cables. And by far, I found that the NRG cables was quite easy to discern the changes when the changes were made. So I was able to tell that the NRG cables were in 7 out of 10 times compared to stock cables. Now, the other thing that I did was I took out the NRG cables from the source and then tried just the power amplifier and momentarily back and forth, trying to see if there's any differences between when I plug it into the source versus plug into the amplifier. And to my surprise, the differences that I found was quite similar. I know how some reviewers or some people talk about how plugging in some power cables to the source brings different things than if you were using the power cable for your power amplifier. In my case, with these cables, I found the exact same thing, just that it kind of added up and made it even better. And the thing that I found with these cables is that it made things more clear. And when I say more clear, that's something that I usually don't like that cables bring to the table, because for the sake of clarity, often things become leaner and more kind of, leaner and more kind of bright and less musical, less full sounding. And that's not the sound I like. I like my sound full, I like it warm, I like it robust. And in my case with these cables, I didn't find them more clear because it's leaner, but what I liked is that it was more clear sounding because the background was darker. So this cable itself actually made the sound more fuller, more full-fledged, more robust, but it was more clear sounding and it was more easier to discern differences in the imaging within the soundstage given because it was more darker in the background. And that's a little bit harder to explain, but it's like a little bit more quieter in the noise floor. There's like looking at a screen, it's just completely black. It's like an OLED. And then the information that pops out at you is very much more clear. It's not like you're seeing new pictures on a TV, right? You're seeing the exact same pictures as you did with a crappy TV, but you're able to discern it a little bit more better, and the colors seems to be a little bit more full and more full-fledged. But because the background is more darker and actually pure black like an OLED TV is, you're able to tell a little bit more better and discern the differences better while appreciating those musicalities and those notes that's coming through. So that's what I found with these cables in the long term. Now, the first thing that I realized, however, was that the dynamic range seems to be opened up. And what I mean by this is that the high frequencies, the extremes, and the airiness was improved, but that's something I noticed later. The absolute first thing I noticed right off the bat was the bottom end just opening up. It was as if like it just boom, like the bottom end just opened up, like there was less kind of blockage. And with the stock cables like from Amazon, it seemed like there was some type of blockage happening. But with these cables, with these NRG power cables, the bottom end seemed to open up. And one thing that I really appreciated was that it seemed to able to control the bottom end better. There was better texture. And like I said, it just seemed like there was less blockage, less holding of the bottom end. So that's something that I appreciated right off the bat with these cables. Now, the last thing that I'll comment is that there seems to be a little bit more deeper and wider soundstage. And that is something that is a little bit subjective as well, depending on the room, because in my room I have this diffusion panels, and also I take the speakers out quite a bit in my listening sessions. So if you have the speakers right up against the wall, and if you don't have the proper setup, or if you don't have the diffusion panels or room treatment like I do, then these are differences that you may not appreciate by just plugging in cables. However, what I found in my situation was that there was better layering. Like I could tell the blackness in between, the layering between the instruments very much more easily while being more full-fledged, as well as the soundstage in depth increasing slightly, as well as the width as well. And the soundstage wasn't like blown away, like, whoa, no, that's so much more soundstage. But it was definitely a discernible difference for me because I have my system set up in a way and treated in a way where I can discern those differences very much easily. So for me, it was a pretty obvious increase in depth and soundstage that I could truly appreciate. So again, I found these cables to be excellent in those regards. Now with the speaker cables, I did something a little bit different. I plugged these in while the NRG power cables were in, as well as when I didn't have them in as well. And what I found was that when I have the stock cables, so the non-NRG cables in just from Amazon, and I had these speaker cables in, it still brought something to the table. It still brought better depth soundstage and better width soundstage, but more depth as well. I found that there was more airiness, and then again the bottom end opened up a little bit more. Now what was impressive to me was that when I had the stock Amazon cables and I plugged these in, I had almost the same effect as the power cables being in my system. So quite frankly, I think the speaker cables did more than the power cables in my situation and in my room. And then I thought to myself, well, I don't think it can get any better than this, even with the NRG power cables, because the speaker cables brought so much to the table, even with just Amazon power cables in being placed. So I obviously plugged in the NRG power cables, and then I played the system to see if there was any more discernible differences or if there was any more better. And to my surprise, I thought there wasn't going to be better, but it was better. The bottom end seemed like a more bottomless pit. Like, I know that the bottom end doesn't really have soundstage, it's not localized, but it seemed like it just opened up and it was more atmospheric. It almost felt like the bottom end enveloped the soundstage, and it's kind of hard to explain, but it seemed like the system was taken to another level of just being able to discern differences. And again, it's not like I'm hearing new things, but I'm hearing things better. It's not hearing different notes or finding new things. It's not like, oh, I never heard that before in that track. No, I heard it, but it's just more musical. It's just less blockage, just more effortless. That's the word, more effortless. Seemed more effortless across the board. And I noticed this with every gear that I have tried, every speaker I have tried. So this isn't something like, that you find with only sensitive speakers or, non-sensitive speakers or tube gear. I know some cables are specifically made for certain gear, but in this case, I've tried these cables with virtually every gear here, like Class D, tube gear, speakers that's sensitive, speakers that's not sensitive, single drivers, coaxial drivers, and I've tried multiple different things, and these are the same differences that I find. It's just the first thing that I notice is the bottom end just opening up, and then the soundstage is better, and then the blackness in between, and then the imaging of the higher frequencies and the airiness is opening up a little bit more. And one thing that I truly appreciate about the sound aspect of these cables and what it brings to the table at an affordable price is that regardless of the affordable price, I have tested cables that's much more expensive. I'm testing some right now. And one thing that I notice is that there's always something that's brought to the table, but sometimes it's not really a, improvement subjectively for me. It's not it's not like a better soundstage or better this, better that, but it's like, okay, it's better at this, but then it's not as good at this with other cables. And that's in comparison to sometimes even much lesser cables. What I appreciate about these cables is that they are an improvement all across the board, like sound staging, imaging, blackness in between, all these kind of things. They're subjective improvements, at least far as I'm concerned. So that's what I found, and I found that these cables do outperform some of the higher end cables I have tested in terms of my subjective opinion. I think these cables are the ones that I'm gonna rock for a very long time, and they're very made well. So even if you don't believe in the sound aspect of these cables, they do look really nice, and I don't think anyone's gonna have a problem with the price point of getting pretty cables for a price point like this. And in comparison to other cables, yes, there's more affordable cables out there that measure really well, like the Blue Jean cables, but they don't look even remotely as nice as these cables. And so if you want something that looks nice, that's high construction, that is handcrafted in Canada, I think this is a really good way to go. So that's all I have to say, and so I hope this video was helpful to you. If it was, please click that like button. It helps my channel out tremendously and it doesn't cost you anything. Make sure to subscribe for more audio videos just like this, and I'll see you guys on the next one.